The silence in the gallery was a living thing, a thick, suffocating blanket, woven from the hushed whispers and averted gazes of the city's art elite. It was a different kind of silence than the one I had grown to love in my studio, the quiet hum of creativity that felt like a warm embrace. This silence was a predator, and I was its prey, my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the backdrop of my shattered world. Just moments ago, this room had been buzzing with excitement, a symphony of champagne flutes clinking and voices murmuring in anticipation. Now the only sound I could hear was the echo of my own name, hanging in the air like a ghost, or rather, the absence of my name. My eyes were locked on the centerpiece of the exhibition, a magnificent sculpture of a phoenix rising from a cascade of molten metal and shattered glass. Its wings, crafted from 1,000 shards of reclaimed stained glass, seemed to capture the very essence of rebirth and defiance. It was a piece born from my soul, a testament to the years I had spent clawing my way back from the brink after my parents' death. I had poured every ounce of my grief, my anger, and my hope into its creation. It was, without a doubt, my masterpiece. And standing beside it, basking in the glow of the spotlights, was Julian. He was a vision of artistic brilliance, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the paint-splattered jeans I usually saw him in. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and his smile, the same one that had once filled me with warmth and encouragement, now felt like a dagger in my gut. He was a master of his craft, a celebrated artist who had taken me under his wing when I was just a lost, grieving teenager with a sketchbook full of impossible dreams. He had been my mentor, my confidant, my friend, my everything. This piece, Julian's voice boomed, rich and resonant, is the culmination of a lifetime of work. It speaks to the resilience of the human spirit, our ability to rise from the ashes of our own destruction. The crowd hung on his every word, their faces a mixture of awe and admiration. They saw a genius at work, a man who had once again pushed the boundaries of his art. They didn't see the truth. They didn't see the countless hours I had spent in my studio, my hands raw and bleeding as I painstakingly pieced together each shard of glass. They didn't see the nights I had slept on a cot beside my work, too consumed by my vision to even think about going home. They didn't see the tears that had mingled with the sweat and the paint, each drop a silent prayer for a better future. They saw Julian, and Julian, it seemed, saw nothing but his own reflection in my stolen masterpiece. My feet felt like lead. But somehow, I managed to push my way through the crowd. I needed to confront him, to hear him say it to my face. The whispers followed me, a venomous snake slithering through the grass. "That's his protégé," I heard someone say. Poor girl, she must be so proud. Proud? I was a volcano on the verge of eruption. When I finally reached him, he turned to me, his eyes twinkling with a predatory light. "Elara," he said, his voice a low purr. "There you are. I was just telling everyone about my latest creation." "Your creation?" The words were barely a whisper, a strangled sound that was a pathetic imitation of the scream that was tearing through my soul. He leaned in closer, his smile never wavering. "Don't be naive, darling," he murmured, his breath a foul mixture of champagne and deceit. "This is how the world works. You have the talent, I have the name. It's a symbiotic relationship." "You stole my work," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of the strength that was boiling inside me. "You stole my life." Julian's eyes hardened, the charming facade cracking for just a moment to reveal the cold, calculating monster beneath. "You have no proof," he hissed. "And who would believe you? A little orphan girl with a penchant for dramatics? Or the man who gave you a chance when no one else would?" He was right. I had no proof. My preliminary sketches, my molds, my notes. Everything had vanished from my studio a week ago. I had been so distraught, so consumed by a frantic, fruitless search, that I had even called Julian for help. He had been so sympathetic, so reassuring. He had told me not to worry. that inspiration would strike again. He had told me to come to his exhibition tonight, to get my mind off things. It was all a lie, a carefully constructed, soul-crushing lie. He turned his back on me then, dismissing me as if I were nothing more than a speck of dust on his perfectly tailored suit. He raised his glass to the crowd, and they roared their approval. I was invisible, a ghost in my own life, while he stood in the spotlight that should have been mine, as I stumbled out of the gallery and into the cold, unforgiving night. The city lights blurred into a kaleidoscope of pain and betrayal. The world I had so carefully rebuilt had been shattered into a million pieces, and I was left to pick up the shards. But as the tears streamed down my face, a new feeling began to emerge, a tiny spark in the darkness of my despair. It was a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a very long time, a feeling that had been buried under years of grief and gratitude. It was rage. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself. Julian was a master of his craft, a man who knew how to manipulate the world to his will. But he had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated the girl who had already risen from the ashes once before. He had forgotten that a phoenix, once it has been reborn, is a creature of immense power and unyielding fire. He had created a monster, and I would be the one to watch him burn. My revenge would not be swift and fiery, a sudden explosion of anger. No, it would be a slow burn, a carefully crafted masterpiece of my own. I would dismantle his life, piece by piece, just as he had stolen mine. He had taught me everything I knew about art, but now I would become an artist of a different kind, an artist of revenge. The rage that had ignited in me that night at the gallery did not burn out. Instead, I banked it, transforming the roaring inferno into a cold, blue flame of pure focus. Hot anger was a chaotic force, prone to mistakes. Cold fury, I was learning, was a tool. It was precise, patient, and utterly ruthless. The artist in me was still alive, but her new medium wasn't clay or glass. It was justice. Her new masterpiece would be Julian's downfall. I spent the next 48 hours in a self-imposed exile, not leaving my small apartment. I didn't answer the calls from concerned friends or the condescending faux sympathetic texts from Julian. I was not grieving. I was studying. I devoured books and articles on digital forensics, intellectual property theft, and corporate espionage. I watched hours of interviews with Julian, dissecting his every word, his every gesture. I studied his ego, his tells, his weaknesses. His greatest weakness, I concluded, was his arrogance. He truly believed he was untouchable, a god in the art world who could create or destroy at will. He saw me not as a threat, but as a footnote in his grand narrative. That was the mistake I would exploit. On the third day, I picked up the phone and called him. I pitched my voice to the perfect frequency of brokenness, letting the tears I had been holding back finally flow. It was a performance worthy of the stage. I told him I was lost, that I didn't know what to do without my work, that he was the only one who had ever believed in me. I asked if I could please just come and work in his studio, even if it was just sweeping the floors. I needed to be around art, I sobbed, or I would disappear completely. The silence on the other end of the line was thick with his satisfaction. I could almost hear him preening. "Of course, my dear Elara," he said, his voice dripping with false paternalism. "Of course. You can start tomorrow. We'll find a small project for you. It's important to get back on the horse." The first week was torture. I swept floors, cleaned brushes, and mixed pigments for his actual assistants, all of whom treated me with a mixture of pity and contempt. I was the failed protégé, a cautionary tale. Julian would walk past me, occasionally patting me on the shoulder and offering empty platitudes. "The muse will return, Elara. Don't you worry." I would just nod, my eyes downcast, playing my part. But while I worked, I observed. I memorized the layout of the studio, the security camera placements, the passwords he carelessly typed. I learned the rhythms of the place. When he arrived, when he took his lunch, when he was most likely to be in his private office. My first break came 2 weeks in. Julian had commissioned a specific type of cobalt-infused glass for a new project, the same rare and expensive glass I had used for the Phoenix's eyes. He sent me to the supplier, a small artisanal glassworks on the other side of town, with a company credit card and a purchase order. It was a menial task, but to me it was a pilgrimage. The owner, a gruff old man named Marcus, whom I had met several times, looked at me with sympathy. "Heard what happened to your studio, kid? Tough break. All that work gone." I nodded sadly. "It's been hard to start over." I looked at the purchase order in my hand. "It's strange. Julian is working with this cobalt glass now. I thought I was the only one you sold this particular mix to. You told me it was my signature." Marcus grunted, polishing a sheet of amber glass with a soft cloth. "Yeah, well, money talks. He came in about a month ago, a week before your incident. Bought up my entire stock. Paid a premium for it, too. Said he had a vision for a grand project." He paused, a flicker of something in his eyes. "Funny thing is, he asked me about your firing schedules. Wanted to know the exact temperatures and timings you used to get that specific, iridescent sheen. I told him that was your secret, but he was very persuasive." My heart began to pound. It was circumstantial, but it was a start. "Did he, by any chance, pay with a credit card?" Marcus nodded. "Always does. Said it's better for his bookkeeping." This was it. A tangible thread. A paper trail that placed him at the scene of the crime before it was even reported. He hadn't just stolen my finished work. He had systematically acquired the materials and knowledge to replicate it, or at the very least, understand its construction to claim it as his own. The next step was gaining access to his digital records. His office was his sanctuary, a sleek minimalist space where he kept his personal laptop. Getting inside was the challenge. The opportunity presented itself during a private showing for a wealthy collector. The studio was a flurry of activity, and Julian was in his element, schmoozing and selling. He had left his office unlocked, too preoccupied to think about security. With my heart in my throat, I slipped inside. I had mere minutes. His laptop was open on his desk. I pulled a small USB drive from my pocket, one I had loaded with a keystroke logging program. It was a desperate, risky move, but I had to try. As my fingers fumbled with the port, I heard footsteps approaching. I ducked behind a large marble pedestal just as Julian and the collector walked in. "And this is where the real magic happens," Julian said with a theatrical flourish. My blood ran cold. I was trapped. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't see me. They talked for what felt like an eternity, discussing brushstrokes and market values. Finally, they left. I waited a full minute, my body trembling, before slipping out of the office, the USB drive still in my hand. The plan had failed. Defeated, I returned to my menial tasks. But as I was cleaning out a supply closet later that day, my hand brushed against a loose floorboard. Curiosity piqued, I pried it open. Beneath it was a small, dusty metal box. Inside, nestled amongst some old invoices, was a digital camera. It looked like one Julian had used years ago. I switched it on. The battery was almost dead, but there was enough power for me to see the last few photos taken. The images made the air leave my lungs. They were photos of my Phoenix sculpture, taken inside my studio. They were dated the day before my supplies and notes went missing. But it was the last photo that was the smoking gun. It was a selfie. Julian, standing proudly next to my unfinished masterpiece. A triumphant, proprietary smirk on his face. In the background, clear as day, was the unique calendar on my studio wall, showing the date. He was so arrogant, so sure of himself, that he had documented his crime. He had taken a trophy, and in his carelessness he had just handed me the weapon I needed to burn his entire world to the ground. The camera felt heavy in my hands, a sacred artifact pulsing with a power that was now mine to wield. Back in the safety of my apartment, I handled it with the precision of a surgeon. I extracted the memory card, my fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The first thing I did was create a digital fortress. I copied the files to an encrypted hard drive, uploaded them to 3 separate secure cloud accounts under different aliases, and even mailed a password-protected USB stick to a post office box I had opened for this very purpose. The original memory card I sealed in a small waterproof pouch and hid it in the one place I knew no one would ever look. I was not just building a case, I was building an arsenal. The evidence was now decentralized, indestructible, and entirely under my control. With the proof secured, the frantic energy of the chase subsided, replaced by the calm, methodical focus of an artist preparing her canvas. My rage was no longer a fire. It was the chisel I would use to carve out my justice. Julian's downfall couldn't be a simple accusation in a sterile courtroom. That would be messy, drawn out, his word against mine, with expensive lawyers muddying the waters. No, the punishment had to fit the crime. He had stolen my art in the most public way imaginable, so his exposure had to be a public spectacle. It had to be a performance, a piece of installation art so devastating it would not only destroy his career, but also become his entire legacy. The perfect stage presented itself a week later. An email blast to the gallery's mailing list announced that Julian was to be the recipient of the prestigious Vanguard Award, a lifetime achievement honor bestowed by the National Arts Council. The ceremony was to be a black-tie gala held at the Grand Museum of Art in a month's time. It was the crowning moment of his career. As I read the announcement, a slow, cold smile spread across my face. It was perfect. They were handing me the spotlight, the audience, and the microphone. All I had to do was write the script. My plan began to take shape. I continued my work at the studio, becoming the most diligent, invisible assistant he had. I fetched his coffee, cleaned his tools, and listened to him boast about the upcoming award with a patient, practiced smile. "They're putting together a tribute video for the ceremony," he told me one afternoon, beaming. "A retrospective of my work. They'll show Phoenix, of course. Can you believe it, Elara? That sculpture has already become my most iconic piece. It's a masterpiece, Julian," I said, my voice soft and even. "It deserves to be celebrated." Inside my heart was a block of ice. While playing the part of the devoted protégé, my evenings were spent executing the real plan. I researched the production company handling the gala. They were a high-end events firm named Aura Productions. I crafted a new identity for myself. Lena, a freelance AV technician with a stellar, albeit completely fabricated, resume. I spent days creating a fake online portfolio, complete with glowing testimonials from non-existent clients. Then I applied for a temporary position on the gala's technical crew. With my intimate knowledge of the art world and the specific pieces that would be featured in Julian's tribute, I was an unusually qualified candidate. I aced the interview. I was hired to help edit and sequence the presentation videos for the ceremony. I now had the keys to the kingdom. The week before the gala, I decided to plant a seed of doubt in Julian's mind. He was in his office, reviewing the seating chart for his table, his arrogance at an all-time high. I knocked softly on the door. "What is it, Elara?" he asked, not looking up. I held out my hand. On my palm was a small tarnished silver button, ornate and unusual. "I found this when I was cleaning out the dust vents in the main studio," I said innocently. "I don't recognize it. I thought it might be yours." He glanced at it, and for the first time in months, his composure cracked. It was a minuscule fracture, a brief widening of his eyes, a slight tightening of his jaw. But I saw it. I knew from my research that he had a vintage cashmere coat he wore only in the deep of winter, a coat he cherished. I had seen it in old photographs. It had a unique set of silver buttons. The break-in at my studio had happened on a bitterly cold night. "No," he said, his voice a little too sharp. "It's not mine." He waved a dismissive hand, but he couldn't take his eyes off the button. "Oh, okay," I said, my voice full of feigned disappointment. I'll just throw it away then. I closed my hand around the button and turned to leave. I had wanted to unsettle him, to make him look over his shoulder during the last few days of his reign. He didn't know what I knew, but a small part of his subconscious now suspected that something was amiss. The master of the universe was no longer entirely assured of his control the night of the gala arrived. The Grand Museum was a galaxy of glittering lights and beautiful people. I moved through the chaos backstage, a ghost in a black crew shirt, my heart beating a steady, rhythmic drum. The tribute video, Julian's magnum opus, was queued up, but on my personal laptop connected to the same network was another video file. It was my video. It started with his triumphant speech at the gallery, then slowly cross-faded to the photos from the hidden camera. It showed him posing with my sculpture in my studio, the date stamp on the image a damning indictment. I had overlaid it with audio from Marcus, the glass supplier, whom I had convinced to give a recorded statement about Julian's suspicious inquiries. The final shot was a simple stark white text on a black screen. The masterpiece of a thief. My work backstage was done. I slipped away to a washroom and changed. Beneath my crew uniform, I was wearing a simple, elegant black dress. I had a ticket, a single seat in the back of the auditorium, purchased under my new alias. I took my place as the lights began to dim. The host walked on stage. The applause thundered and the ceremony began. I saw Julian at the front table, resplendent in a tuxedo, soaking in the adoration. He looked invincible, but I could see the slight, repetitive tap of his finger on his wine glass. The silver button had done its work. He was on edge. Finally, the moment came. The president of the Arts Council stood at the podium. And now, to present the Vanguard Award for Lifetime Achievement to a true visionary, a master of form and feeling, Mr. Julian Croft. But before we welcome him to the stage, let's look back at his incredible journey. The massive screen above the stage flickered to life. Julian smiled, preening for the camera, ready to watch his life's work flash before his eyes. In my clutch, I held a small, unmarked remote. It was keyed to the presentation software. I had one button to press, one press to switch the video feed from his tribute to my truth. The room was silent. The air was electric with anticipation. My masterpiece was complete. All I had to do was unveil it. My thumb hovered over the small black button on the remote. The world seemed to shrink until it was just that single point of contact, a nexus of past pain and future vindication. On the giant screen, the tribute video began, just as the producers had planned it. A montage of Julian's early works filled the screen, set to soaring orchestral music. He was brilliant in his youth, I couldn't deny that. On the live feed camera focused on the head table, Julian's face was a mask of humble pride. He gave a small, magnanimous nod to the audience, a king accepting his due. He thought the scare with the silver button had just been a ghost of his own guilty conscience. He thought he was safe. I let his moment of glory hang in the air for 10 perfect, delicious seconds. Let him taste the sweetness of his triumph one last time. Then I pressed the button. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered and went black. The majestic music cut out, plunging the grand hall into an abrupt, confusing silence. A murmur rippled through the crowd. On stage, the presenter looked nervously toward the tech booth. At the front table, Julian's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. And then, my voice, calm and clear, filled the room. I had recorded the narration myself, my tone not of an accuser, but of a documentarian. Every artist has a story, my voice echoed from the speakers. Every masterpiece a soul. But sometimes the story is a lie, and the soul has been stolen. The screen came to life again, but it wasn't with Julian's art. It was the first photograph. Julian standing in my studio, his hand resting possessively on the unfinished wing of my phoenix, that triumphant smirk on his face. The date and timestamp glowed in the bottom corner, a digital brand proving he was there a full day before I reported the break-in. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It was a physical sound, a wave of shock that washed over the audience. All at once, 1,000 heads swiveled from the screen to Julian. The live camera zoomed in on his face, and his portrait of ruin was projected 20 feet high for the world to see. The blood drained from his face, his skin turning a waxy pale gray. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The mask of the celebrated artist didn't just crack, it disintegrated. My video continued, relentless. The next image was a side-by-side comparison, a high-resolution photo of my original, signed concept sketch, and a still from a news report of Julian unveiling the finished sculpture. They were identical. Then came the audio of Marcus, the glass supplier, his gruff voice clear and damning. He wanted to know her firing schedules, her secrets, paid a premium for her exact materials, a week before the girl's studio was hit. With every new piece of evidence, the chaos in the room grew. People were standing up, shouting. The flashes of press cameras began to strobe like lightning in a hurricane. Julian, finally finding his voice, scrambled to his feet, knocking over his chair. "Lies!" he shrieked, his voice a pathetic, cracking parody of his usual resonant tone. "This is slander, a fabrication. She's a delusional, failed student trying to tarnish my name." But his words were drowned out by the final, devastating blow. The video showed a split screen. On one side, a clip of him from a recent interview saying, "The phoenix came to me in a dream, fully formed, a vision only I could bring to life." On the other side, the last photo from the camera played on a loop. Julian's smug selfie with my work in progress, a thief posing with his loot. The video ended. The screen went black, and 3 words appeared in stark white letters, "A masterpiece of theft." The hall erupted. It was pandemonium. Organizers were running onto the stage, trying to regain control. Security guards were moving toward Julian, who was now hysterically pointing a trembling finger into the crowd, his face contorted in a mask of impotent rage. "Find her! Find that little witch!" He didn't need to look far. As planned, a single powerful spotlight cut through the darkness, finding me in the back row. As I slowly stood up, the chaos subsided slightly, the wave of noise receding as a new focal point emerged. Every eye in the room turned to me. I was no longer the invisible assistant, the pitiful protégé. In that moment, I was the most powerful person in the room. I didn't shout. I didn't have to. I lifted a small wireless microphone to my lips that one of the more sympathetic tech crew members had left for me. My voice was quiet, but it carried through the hall with absolute authority. "My name is Elara Vance," I said. The silence was now deafening. Julian Croft was my teacher. He taught me that great art must always contain a piece of the artist's soul. He taught me that art is truth. I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the stunned faces of the audience, before finally landing on Julian. His hysterical rage had collapsed into a quivering, pathetic heap. He looked like one of his own sculptures, abandoned midway through, a grotesque monument to his own hubris. The phoenix from ashes was my soul. It was my truth. I continued, my voice unwavering. It was the story of a young woman rebuilding her life from nothing. It is a story of rebirth. And now, I finished, my gaze locking with Julian's one last time. It is the story of his undoing. I gently placed the microphone on the empty seat beside me. I turned my back on the mayhem, on the shattered career and the public disgrace of the man who had tried to erase me. I didn't need to see what happened next. As I walked toward the exit, the sound of the camera shutters roaring behind me was not an intrusion, but applause. It was the sound of my victory. I didn't look back. The past was in ashes behind me. All I could see was the wide open door ahead, and the promise of a new beginning I had forged with my own 2 hands. The aftermath was not a storm, but a tidal wave. I didn't watch the news or read the articles, but their headlines were impossible to avoid, plastered across every newsstand and website. Art world in ashes, the fall of Julian Croft. From protégé to prosecutor, the truth behind the phoenix, a masterpiece of deceit. My phone buzzed incessantly for 3 days straight with calls from reporters, gallery owners, and lawyers until I finally changed the number. I had no interest in adding my voice to the cacophony. My performance at the gala had been my statement. My video was my testimony. The truth was now a wildfire, and it no longer needed me to tend the flames. From what I gathered, Julian's ruin was absolute. The National Arts Council officially rescinded the Vanguard Award within hours. The gallery that had hosted his fraudulent exhibition pulled the show, issuing a groveling public apology and vowing a full internal investigation. Collectors began to question the provenance of his other works, and whispers of past abuses of power, of other students whose ideas had been absorbed into his own, began to surface. He had built his kingdom on a foundation of lies, and I had simply knocked out the cornerstone. The entire rotten structure had collapsed in on itself. About a week after the gala, I received a certified letter. It was from the board of the Grand Museum. They were, they wrote, profoundly and eternally sorry. They explained that, in an effort to make amends and champion the artist who was wronged, they had acquired the Phoenix from the private collector Julian had sold it to. They were formally reattributing it to me, and wanted to invite me to a private unveiling of the new installation, with my name finally where it belonged. I went. I arrived an hour before the museum opened to the public, the halls echoing and empty. The museum's director, a woman with tired, apologetic eyes, led me to the main rotunda, and there it was. It stood on a pedestal in the center of the vast, sunlit room, more beautiful than I had remembered. The light pouring through the glass dome above made the stained glass wings shimmer with an inner fire. It looked like it was truly alive. My creation. My story. The director kept a respectful distance as I approached it. Fixed to the marble base was a new plaque, its engraved letters gleaming. It read, "Phoenix from Ashes Elara." Vance beneath it, a simple inscription. Art is truth. I reached out and laid my palm against the cool metal of its body. I felt no anger, no lingering bitterness. The rage that had fueled me for weeks was gone, burned away in the final cathartic blaze of my revenge. All I felt was a profound sense of peace. It was like seeing a beloved friend again after a long and difficult journey. I had not only reclaimed my art, I had reclaimed myself. As I was leaving, the director stopped me. "The Arts Council has been in touch," she said. "They have decided to repurpose the Vanguard Grant. They're rebranding it as the Phoenix Grant, an annual award for a promising emerging artist whose work demonstrates exceptional resilience and integrity. They have unanimously chosen you as its first recipient." I was stunned. The very prize he had coveted, the symbol of his entire fraudulent career, was now being handed to me. It wasn't just justice. It was poetry. Months have passed since that day. I used the grant money to lease a new studio, a massive, light-filled loft in a converted warehouse overlooking the river. It's a space filled with possibility, with the scent of sawdust and turpentine. A space that is entirely my own. The Phoenix remains at the museum, a silent testament to the truth, inspiring a new generation of artists. My solo exhibition is scheduled for next spring. I received one final communication from Julian. It was an email, sent from some anonymous, untraceable account. It was a pathetic, rambling screed, part confession, part accusation. He wrote that I had not only destroyed him, but I had destroyed the art itself. He asked me how I could live with myself. He begged for an answer. I thought about it for a moment, sitting in the warm sunlight of my new studio. How could I live with myself? I looked at my hands, no longer raw and bleeding from piecing together broken glass, but steady and strong. I looked at the new block of uncarved mahogany in front of me, its grain swirling with untold stories. I felt a genuine, unforced smile touch my lips for the first time, in what felt like a lifetime. I pressed delete without a single word in reply. He didn't deserve an answer. He didn't deserve another second of my time. He was a ghost, a footnote in my story. My story was no longer about ashes. It was about what comes after. It was about the rising. And I was just getting started.